So, hello there, and welcome back to yet another Night of the Movies podcast. And in these podcasts, I talk all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing The Morning Show Season 3. But, just before I do that, I should say what's the start of every podcast I do, which is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers, but if you prefer to listen to your podcast on Spotify, well, you're in luck, as you can also listen to this podcast on Spotify at Night of the Movies on that platform. And if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, and you there to podcast listeners, then you can also check this podcast out originally on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, whatever you're watching or listening to this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course, and leave me with some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there's always things to improve on, and feedback is, as ever, much appreciated. So, let's get into it. The Morning Show Season 3. So, if you hadn't guessed already, this is a follow-on from The Morning Show Seasons 1 and 2. And I recently watched Seasons 1 and 2 about a month ago now, and I think I even did a podcast on the first two seasons of The Morning Show on this channel. Yeah, I did a podcast, and if you haven't checked that out yet, go and check out my thoughts on The Morning Show Season 1 and 2 if you are interested, and if you haven't done so yet. So yeah, I was really into The Morning Show Season 1 and 2. I really liked what those first two seasons did. In fact, I may even go as far to say I loved the first season. The first season was just there. You know what I mean? It had everything that you wanted this show to have. At least it did for me. It had some really complex and networked storylines which all intertwined with one another in a way which felt natural and didn't feel like it was forced. The characters were all interesting. You know, none of them were one-dimensional. They all had some very interesting characterization to them. It tackled some very interesting themes in some quite interesting ways I didn't expect it to. And I thought the casting of Steve Carell in the first season and even the second season, I wasn't in the second season as much, but he played a much bigger role in the first season. I thought the casting of Steve Carell was great. Jennifer Aniston showed off her performance. She showed that she could, that she could do a performance which I never ever thought she could do, I've got to admit. And yeah, she was phenomenal in that first season. And Reese Witherspoon, the way they incorporated her character into the first season, it was so good. And season 2 wasn't as good. It wasn't bad, and I still thought season 2 was a worthy follow-up, but it felt like I was trying to do too much, and it felt like I was trying to approach all these different storylines, and at times I just wanted it to go slow down a bit. I understand what it's trying to do, but it felt messy. It felt messy at times, and I didn't think season 2 was nearly as good as season 1. It didn't have quite as good of an ending. Like, the ending to season 1 of The Morning Show is great. I was sat there going, yes, this is brilliant. Didn't feel that with season 2. The ending, from what I remember, and that shows you how memorable the ending was, the fact that I don't remember it too well, but from what I remember, it just sort of ends. You know, things happen, a couple of interesting things and quite important things happen, but then it just ends. And I felt that season 2, it had more in it that I liked than disliked, but I still felt it was a step down. Nevertheless, I was looking forward to season 3, naturally, because as I've already stated, I am a fan of this show. Love season 1, season 2 was a solid follow-up, and season 3, the trailers looked great, and with the addition of Jon Hamm, who's my favourite actor's work in the business, I can't wait to see him in Fargo, which the next season of Fargo starts soon, and he looks great in that. And I love him in Baby Driver, I love him in Good Omens, two very different performances, and I haven't seen loads of Mad Men, but what I have seen of him in Mad Men, I have liked. I think he gives off a very good performance in Mad Men. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Jon Hamm. When I heard that he was going to be in this show, I was like, okay, now I've got my interest quite a bit. And as I already mentioned, I thought the trailers looked great, and I wanted to see where the story went after season 2, because I was sitting there at the end of season 2 going, where do you go with that? Because they just left things off where it felt like, I don't know, they weren't planning for a season 3 necessarily, but still, a season 3 came, and I was very excited for it, and I thought the trailers looked great. And in the third season of the morning show, we have John Hamm, what's his name? Paul Marks. That's a character that John Hamm plays. Paul Marks, who is this business tycoon. As we see in the show, he may or may not buy UBA, the fictional news company where all the characters we follow have been working since season 1. Although you realise that maybe Paul Marks and John Hamm's character's motives are actually not as they seem. Surprise, surprise. And that's all you need to know about season 3 of The Morning Show if you haven't already seen it yet. I mean, as you would have guessed already, a lot of things happen that I haven't even touched on, but that's the general gist of this season. Paul Marks, John Hamm's character, wants to buy UBA, but you realise that he might have some ulterior motives. And honestly, I really enjoyed season 3 of The Morning Show. It's not as good as season 1. I'm starting to think now that maybe season 1 was lightning in a bottle. But saying that, season 3 was still a solid... It was still a solid series of television, in my opinion. I was still interested in the characters. I thought all the performances were still magnetic. Every single time Jennifer Aniston is on screen, she commands your attention. I will say, there's one moment in this season which reminded me of her performance as Rachel in Friends, and R.I.P. Matthew Perry here, by the way. So sad that he has now passed away. But anyway, going back onto what I was saying. Yeah, there's one moment in this season where she did remind me a bit of a performance as Rachel in Friends, which I wasn't too fond of, because I was like, no, go back to Alex, go back to your performance as Alex, because I find that far more compelling than your performance as Rachel. But she's still really good in this season, and she gets a lot of moments to shine. And her bond with John Hamm in this season, the way they put those two together, I think is kind of genius for many reasons, and I think it works so well. I loved the addition of John Hamm in this season. I thought he was great. He basically plays Elon Musk, and I did find that a bit ironic because I'm pretty sure in the last episode, if I remember correctly, I mean, I only watched like 16 hours. I only watched the last episode of The Morning Show season 3 about 16 hours ago now. But if I remember correctly, they do actually reference Elon Musk in real life in that episode, if you get what I mean. And in this season, though, Paul Marks is basically Elon Musk. John Hamm is playing Elon Musk for the fictional world of The Morning Show. Again, if you get what I mean, I'm not sure if I'm making sense there, but you understand what I'm saying. John Hamm is basically playing Elon Musk in this third season of The Morning Show, and he does a very good job. You never really feel comfortable when he's on screen. I must admit, I'm not a fan of Elon Musk, and I was not a fan of the Paul Marks character in this season, but in the way I think the show wanted to. Like, I liked that character quite a lot, but I also didn't. I enjoyed not liking that character. Every single time he was on screen, I was like, I don't like you. But at the same time, I find you a very compelling character. And I think John Hamm makes a lot of that work. I must admit, I don't think that all the writing with him is totally on point in this season. But I think that John Hamm gives off a very good, groovy performance. You know, he's one of those people that oozes tension every single time he's on screen with his performance as Paul Marks, and you never really know whether you can trust him or not, and I think John Hamm plays into that very well. And he also evokes a lot of his performance as Don Draper in Mad Men with his performance here. He's not playing a too similar character. Again, I haven't seen loads of Mad Men. I've only seen the first season, but for me, it felt like he was playing a not too dissimilar character than he did in Mad Men. And I think it worked, and I think his addition to the show elevated the season because his scenes with Jennifer Aniston as Alex are great. His scenes with Billy Crudup are fantastic. Every single time Billy Crudup's character, I forgot his name off the top of my head right now, Corey, that's it, Corey Ellison. Every single time Corey and Paul Marks on screen, I was glued to the screen. Those two, whenever on the screen, are great. And I also thought that what's her name? I just forgot her name off the top of my head right now. Reese Witherspoon. Every single time I say a name, by the way, and I mentioned this in my last podcast in the morning show, but I'm going to mention it again here. Every single time I think of Reese Witherspoon, it reminds me of the joke I heard about her. Have you ever heard of that woman who killed somebody and how she did it? It was Reese Witherspoon. It's a terrible joke. But the first time I heard that, I laughed my head off. But I love Reese Witherspoon. I think she's a great actress, and I think she's great in this show overall, and that she continues to give a good performance here. I preferred what they did with Bradley in this season than what they did with her in Season 2. In Season 2, it felt in parts that they didn't really know what to do with her. And I can see why one might argue that with this season. Although for me, it felt like she had more of a storyline that you could, latch onto. A storyline that you can actually get into. And I really liked what they did with her character. I can understand why some people wouldn't, but I liked it quite a bit. And I thought Reese Witherspoon gave up a very good performance in this season of The Morning Show. And I'll talk about this again in a bit in this podcast. If they do a Season 4, it'll be interesting if they get her back. That's all I'm going to say, in case people haven't seen the last episode of the season yet. If they do a Season 4 of The Morning Show, I'll be very interested if they get her back. I mean, they kind of have to, because she's one of the main leads of this series. But it'd be interesting if they didn't as well. So anyway, I'll be looking forward to that if a Season 4 happens, as I'll discuss again a bit later in this podcast. And I thought that Greta Lee as Stella was a standout in this season. She was in the last season, and at times it felt like she was there. Well, it felt like she didn't have loads to do. I don't remember much memorable moments with her in Season 2. In this season, it's like they watch past lives, which she is remarkably good in, and they went, oh, we need to use Greta Lee a lot more because she's actually a really fantastic actress. And she has so many moments in this season when I was like, yes, that is one heck of a character, and Greta Lee is giving off such a good performance. She is a standout in this series. I think Jennifer Aniston, Reese Witherspoon, they're both great. Greta Lee is the thing that shined the most for me in this series, though. She was the thing that shone the most for me. When I was watching this season of The Morning Show, I was like, yes, every single time she was on screen, you just had, again, this magnetic force, which just, yeah, she worked really, really well. And also, I thought that Nicole Bahire, I probably mispronounced that name. In fact, I'm almost definitely mispronouncing that name. I thought her addition as Christina Hunter, the character she plays, was great in the season too. She has a lot of moments to shine. And I liked what they did with Mia as well. I thought what they did with all the female characters worked really well. And they were all given... It felt like they were given far more to in this season than they were in the last season. I do feel that the last season was a bit convoluted, and this season I really liked how they pulled everything back to a certain degree. There's still a lot going on, but it didn't feel as messy. It didn't feel like one plot line was there for the sake of being there. Like, all the plot line, none of it felt like one plot line too much, if you understand what I mean. It felt like all the storylines were earned. It felt like there was enough in the storylines to get into, and all the storylines were engaging to certain degrees. I do think there's some storylines which are better than others still, but that being said, there was enough with most of the storylines which made them work, and none of it felt too messy this time around. Whereas in Season 2 it did feel a bit too convoluted for my liking. However, I will say I wasn't in love with what they did with Chip in this season. I wish Chip, brilliantly played by Mark Duplass, and I just recently watched him in the Creep films, which is great, and he's also great in, what's it called off the top of my head? Safety Not Guaranteed. That's it called. I just remembered. That's what it's called. I just remembered. I forgot what it was on the top of my head, and I just remembered, and he's great in all of those films, the Creep films and Safety Not Guaranteed. I've been watching more stuff recently, and he was so good in Season 1. He was so good. And in Season 2, he had a bit less to do, understandably so, with the way Season 1 ends. But I still really enjoyed watching his character. In that season, I think Mark Duplass gave off a great performance in Season 1 and 2 of The Morning Show. And I think he gives off a great performance here. My problem is, I wish they had more... I wish they gave that character more to do. Chip in this season felt sidelined quite a few times. He still has quite a few moments to shine, particularly in the last episode of season 3. But it also feels like he's there because he was in season 1 and 2. And like, oh, he has a close relationship with Jennifer Aniston's character, Alex. We have to have him in this season again. Why? Because we do. You know, it didn't really feel like he was given that much to do. He's given a love interest in this season. I'm not really sure why, if I'm being completely honest. Okay, I get why. And if you've seen the season, you know what I mean. I get why he was given a love interest. But I still don't think it works. I still don't really think it works. And if they do, and I said do there. If they do a season 4 of the morning show, I hope he has more to do. And I think he will. I wish, because Chip in season 1 ended up being my favourite character, and when you watch season 1 of the morning show, you understand why. I didn't feel that with season 2, and I didn't feel even more with season 3. I'm hoping they give him more to do. And maybe it's because the actor, Mark Duplass, wasn't on set too much. I don't know, but it felt like he was sidelined, and he didn't feel like he was one of the main characters this time around, which was a bit of a disappointment because I was such a fan of that character season 1, and it feels like over time they've given that character less and less to do. Still, I thought that there was a lot of great performance in the season. I thought there was more good stuff with the characters, there's more compelling and engaging stuff to get into with these characters, and there was a lot to admire. I think it's a well-made show, and there's some really good directing. I think it's episode 3 or 4, which starts off with this one long take where Staying Alive by the Bee Gees is playing, as you see Corey Ellison, brilliantly played by Billy Crudup in the series. There's one thing I haven't mentioned yet. Billy Crudup, so good in this show. He's given all the best lines, and he is one of my favourite characters. And he was one of my favourite characters season 1, and he continues to be one of my favourite characters in this season, and he was in season 2 as well. And you see him, and I think at the start of episode 3, he's walking through and yet Staying Alive, and it's a really well directed opening to the episode. And yeah, there's a lot to admire, and I did prefer this season over season 2. Now, that all being said, it's beginning to feel a lot like Succession. You know, at that time of the year now, it's, as I'm recording this, the 9th of November, and we're getting close to Christmas. You know, it's beginning to feel a lot like Christmas. And with the morning show, and by the way, I can't sing to save my life, but as I already said, with the morning show, it's beginning to feel a lot like Succession. That's what it really is. It's beginning to feel a lot like Succession, and sometimes that works in its favour, and then sometimes it doesn't. I love Succession, and it ended so perfectly early this year with season 4 and that ending, which apparently some people have been iffy on. I thought, and sign on here, I thought the ending of season 4 of Succession was fan-flipping-tastic and was perfect. Anyway, going back onto the morning show. Yeah, this is beginning to feel like Succession though. Whether it's in the fact that you have these characters once again trying to get to the top and who can stay at the top. You have a lot of people yelling at each other in boardrooms, which happened a lot in Succession from what I remember. And in this season, you also have, as I've already mentioned, the addition of Jon Hamm's character, who is this business tycoon who is nerdy, who is self-absorbed, and you don't really like. Remind you of anyone in Succession? Alexander Skarsgård's character is basically the same character. He is basically the same. He's a, you know, in Succession you have Alexander Skarsgård in there, and he is a business tycoon who you shouldn't trust. And the last episode as well, it even had this moment when I turned to my mum, who I was watching it with, and I went, well, this just sounds like the music for Succession. It felt like they were trying to be Succession, and I didn't totally love that. I said in my podcast that I did on the first 2 seasons of the morning show about a year ago now, I said in that podcast that the morning show seasons 1 and 2 feel like Succession mixed with The West Wing, mixed with the Aaron Sorkin show, The Newsroom, which by the way, if you haven't watched, I'd definitely recommend. And I said that it's all those three shows mixed together, but it's not as good as any of those three shows. And the thing is, though, it was still its own entity. It was taking inspiration from those shows. Clearly, there's a lot of walking through corridors, which you get in The West Wing. There's a lot of, as already mentioned, Succession similarities in the first few seasons of The Morning Show. And it also reminded me a lot of the Aaron Sorkin TV show, The Newsroom. But it was also very much its own thing, though. It's still its own entity. This season doesn't feel like that as much. It feels like it gets lost, and that the writers behind this season, I don't know this for certain, but it feels like they watched Succession and went, oh, that's a brilliantly written show, let's try and do what they're doing. And I just don't think it totally works. It reminded me that Succession is a far better and well-written show, and it reminded me that it has much better directing. I don't think the directing in this season of The Morning Show is bad, but the directing in Succession is on another level. The intensity in the filmmaking is, it's brilliant. And you don't necessarily get that in The Morning Show. And it also reminded me that Succession has, better characters. I like the characters in The Morning Show, but Succession has far more interesting characters and, honestly, overall better performances. There's some, again, fantastic performers in this season of The Morning Show that I've already spoken about, but I think Succession has better performances, and I think it's just a far better show overall. Yeah, I'm going to stick with that. I do think it's a far better show, and I think The Morning Show has lost its way a bit after... Can I spoil it? Yeah, I'm going to spoil it. In case you haven't seen Morning Show Season 2, spoiler here, I think the show had lost its way after Steve Carell's character died in Season 2 of The Morning Show. I think it's lost its way after that because it feels now like it isn't totally sure what story it wants to tell, and that the writers are going, oh, let's do this, and let's have a character like Alexander Skarsgård's character in Succession come in, because we can see that people like that in Succession. So let's try and do it so we can get more viewers, because apparently some of the viewership has been down on this season of The Morning Show. And I don't think it works that. I think it works to a degree, but it makes the show feel less like its own thing and more like it's relying on what other TV shows have done better, if you catch my drift. I'm not sure how much I'm making sense because, as we call on this podcast today, I am very, very tired. Didn't get much sleep last night. But the point I'm making is I hope that going forward, if they do a season 4 of The Morning Show, that it's more of its own thing. Because for me, although I did enjoy this season of The Morning Show overall, it doesn't quite have that narrative thrust and that narrative through line that keeps pushing you forward that season 1 of The Morning Show did. I watched season 1 of The Morning Show in 1 week. I don't really do that with TV shows, but that first season was just so on point and it had this narrative thrust that made you want to keep watching. Season 2 had that to a degree, but I also think it started to lose that. And season 3, every single time I'd finish an episode, because I watch this weekly, I didn't feel that excited about watching the next episode though. I'd finish, episode 3, and then I would know that a week later I'd get to watch episode 4, but I wouldn't be counting down the minutes. And I wish that I was for a show like this. Whereas you get some other TV shows that I watched over the past however many months, like Succession, like Barry, like many other fantastic television series that we've had this year so far, and I have been counting down the days, the minutes, and however long until we get the next episode of those seasons. I remember doing that with Barry, because I loved Barry season 4, which again there's been some pushback towards. Don't understand that either. And I wish that I felt the same way about The Morning Show. I do feel that it's starting to lose its way, and I feel that it needs to, if they do a season 4, it needs to have a better setup. And on the topic of season 4, I don't know if they're going to do it. I'm interested to see if a season 4 happens. Now I'm recording this, as already said, on the 9th of November, and I just found out this morning that the SAG after strike has now ended, which is great. So by the time this podcast comes out, season 4 of The Morning Show may have already been confirmed. As far as I'm aware though, it hasn't been already. I know there's some reports saying that it is happening, but as far as I'm aware, nothing major has been confirmed as season 4 of the morning show. And I'm wondering whether it will happen. And if it does happen, as we said, I'm hoping that they have more of a concrete plan that you can see with this season, that you can start to see where the threads are heading, because you didn't get that as much in the season, and I'm hoping that it has more of a narrative thrust. What I mean by that is I'm hoping it has that narrative which makes you keep on watching going forward, which makes you excited for the next episode if you're watching the show weekly. And I didn't feel that season 3 had that enough. And it's why I do still prefer season 1. I still think season 1 of the morning show is the best season we've had of this show so far. Right, so this is an add-on. One thing I forgot to mention when I was actually recording my podcast, but I just remembered to mention now, is that I hope if they do another season of the morning show, they have more with Alex's family again, because that was such an integral part of season 1, and they kind of touched on it a little bit in season 2, but it felt mostly forgotten about. There was this whole thing in season 1 about Alex in a relationship with her daughter, and it feels like they've forgotten about that. For the most part, since season 1, it feels like they've mostly forgotten about that. And Alex's relationship with her now ex-husband, which again, they feel like they've forgotten about. I hope that if they do a season 4, they add more women with that. They add more in with her and her family, with Alex and her family, because that was such an integral part of season 1, and it feels mostly forgotten about. And one other thing I want to say that I forgot to mention as I actually recording this podcast is that there's a lot of scenes in this season of the morning show that take place on the balcony in Alex's apartment. And you can clearly tell that the background that they're filming on is a green screen. You can tell that a lot of the background in this season of the morning show, it's not even just on Alex's balcony, actually. It's in a lot of the courtroom scenes, well, not the courtroom scenes, sorry, the boardroom scenes, and a lot of scenes that take place in offices, in tall buildings. You can tell that the background is CGI. And you could tell that a bit in seasons 1 and 2, but it wasn't as much of an issue. I don't know why, but in this season, it caught my eye a bit more, and I hope that they cut down on that and maybe use more real sets and go to more real locations in the next season of the morning show, because it felt like they were using CGI a bit too much for background effects in this season. It's not a big issue, that's more of a nitpick, but it did catch my eye and I wanted to mention it. Anyway, back to the podcast. But that all being said, it was still a good season of TV. And I did still enjoy watching every episode. I still watch it, weekly. I wouldn't say look forward to watching every episode weekly, but I did still watch every episode either on a Wednesday, if I was busy on a Wednesday or a Thursday, so I would be caught up with the series. And I'm glad that I did, because it had a lot of great moments. And for me, I just like the fact that it felt less messy. More than anything, I like the fact that it felt less convoluted than season 2 did. It felt like it pulled back on the storylines and it focused on the characters you wanted it to. I didn't feel, again, that there was one too many storylines either, which is one thing I really liked. And the addition of Jon Hamm as Paul Marks works so well. But I do still think it's beginning to look a lot like Succession. And, well, it's beginning to feel a lot like Succession, should I say. Not beginning to look a lot like Succession, it's beginning to feel a lot like Succession. And I don't think that's for the best. I'm hoping in the next season they make it more its own thing again, get more of a narrative thrust, and if a season 4 happens, make it its final season. If a season 4 of the morning show happens, let's try and get that to be the final season of this show. Because I've enjoyed this show overall, certainly. I think it's a good season of television. I think it's a good television show overall. It's not one of the best television shows out there right now, in my opinion, but it's definitely enjoyable and entertaining to watch, and it has some really compelling stuff in there. But this season, I will say, and this is the last thing I'll mention, last thought I'll say, is I do think it's starting to outstay its welcome. I think that season 4 they could do really well and finish it off with a bang. I'm just hoping that's it, though. that's it. Let's finish off with a bang with season 4, and let's see where all these storylines end. Because I enjoyed season 3 quite a bit overall. I think it's a solid season of television. But I'm starting to feel like it's outstaying its welcome. Yeah. I'm starting to feel like it's run its course. Then again, season 4 might come out and I might be blown away by the first episode and go, actually, you can clearly tell they're setting this up for, 3 more seasons. But we'll just have to wait and see. And so, overall, I liked the morning show season 3. It's not as good as season 1, but it's a step up from season 2, and I do think it's got enough in there to really admire and get yourself stuck into. And so for that reason, I'm going to say that the morning show season 3, I'm going to say it's an 8.3 out of 10. Now the reason I'm giving it that rating is because I think there is a lot of really great stuff in there, which is why I've given it an 8 higher. But I can't give an 8.5 because it didn't blow me away this season. It didn't have the same effect that the first season of the morning show did for me. Again, I've spoken about this quite a few times in this podcast today, and in the last podcast that I did on the first 2 seasons of the morning show, where I got to the end of the first season, I was like, wow, that was great. Can't wait to watch season 2. Didn't have that with this season. I do think the ending, I think it's got a far better ending than flipping season 2 had. Season 2's ending, I've spoken about this already, I didn't think it had much of a conclusive end, and yet the ending to season 3 did have a conclusive end, and I thought it had a far better finale than season 2 had. But still, it's not got me dying to watch season 4. And I do think there's a lot of great stuff, as I've already said. I think the addition of Jon Hamm is great. Every scene he shared with Jennifer Aniston or Billy Crudup's characters works so well. I think Reese Witherspoon is showing more range in this season of the morning show than she did in the last season. She is so good. Love what Greta Lee is doing in the season. Love her character, Stella. Love how she is incorporated in all the Paul Marks sort of stuff, and I think that I like what they did with the Mia character, and I also like the new character Christina Hunter. Yeah, there's a lot that I really liked, got into the storylines, but it is beginning to feel a lot like Succession, and I'm hoping that the next season pulls back on that and becomes more of its own show once again, and brings in that narrative thrust. But still, I really enjoyed season 3 of the morning show. And so, for that reason, I'm going to say, as I've already said in this podcast, I'm going to give the morning show season 3, I'm going to give it an 8.3 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, that is it for the podcast for today. So if you have seen the morning show season 3, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. Maybe you hated the season and you thought it was the worst season of the morning show so far. And if that's the case, please let me know why in the comment section below. Or maybe you on the other end though. Maybe you watched this season of the morning show and thought it was the best season of this show yet. Whatever your thoughts are on the morning show season 3, please let me know them in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like, subscribe on this podcast. And look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As what he said, thank you as always for watching or listening to this podcast, and I suppose that's it. So I will see you guys again soon, but bye for now. Bye.